Good afternoon. I'm Jay Kalichuran, the chairperson of the KZN Centre of the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers. I extend a warm welcome to our presenter this afternoon, Richard Aschlader, officials and members of the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers, and guests. I hope you are all taking care and keeping safe during this pandemic while keeping the energy flowing. Attendees, please ensure that the volume is turned up on your device. Ensure that you have a stable internet connection for smooth streaming and audio. You may ask questions via the questions panel, which is located within the GoToWebinar control panel. By default, the control panel is located on the right-hand side of your screen. You will not be able to chat with each other. However, you are encouraged to ask questions. A recording of the presentation will be made available on this SAIEE YouTube channel, SAIEE TV. The recording will also be made available on the SAIEE website under the Events drop-down menu in the section Past Events and Webinars. The page is updated regularly, so ensure you check as often as possible for new uploads, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more uploads. A certificate of attendance will be issued a few weeks after this webinar, once we have received the CPD validation number for this webinar from EXA. This afternoon, our presenter is Richard Aschlader. Richard is a technical director at Zutari. He is considered a multidisciplinary technical generalist on many aspects of power transmission and distribution and generation. He has the experience in practical design and project management in advisory services through all transmission, distribution, and generation. He has been involved in projects throughout Africa. Richard is a registered professional engineer as well as a professional project manager. He is passionate about sustainability, innovation, and wants to see South Africa prosperous. Richard is currently embarking on a PhD in sustainable cities. The topic of presentation this evening is on the green economy. Much has been said about the development of the green economy in South Africa. This presentation will provide an overview of the development and advancement of the sustainability agenda from the new growth path to the National Development Plan, with a particular focus on the energy sector. It will cover the influence of the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainability Development Goals and their influence on policy from an African Union, SADC, and national perspective. He will touch on the effectiveness of these policies and the challenges facing the realization of the sustainable agenda as envisaged in the NDP and the emergence of an effective green economy. Richard, with that, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Jay. I'm just waiting for the transfer, if you can do that, but thank you everyone for attending today. It is really an honor to go here. While I'm waiting for the transfer over, there we go. I'd like to, while I'm waiting for the transfer, I'm just going to give you a quick disclaimer. So I am presenting in my personal capacity here. So I am a member of Zutari, and but I would like to say that the views I'm expressing are not those of the SAIEE or Zutari. Then just quickly, there we go, okay. So we're just trying to sort out the screen view here. So just give me a second. So I'm a member of Zutari. Zutari used to be Oricon. We are now have rebranded in the last couple of years. We're about 1,900 engineers scattered through Africa, and we are multidisciplinary in nature. Jay, can you just confirm if you're seeing the screen, please? Battling now with the presentation.
There's nothing now, Richard. We had a bit of the previous screen, not the
Okay, Rob,
slide.
Okay, Jay, I'm just going to hand back to you. If you can just hand back to me quickly, and then I'm going to just choose the screen selection as well again. So Jay, if you could just hand back to me quickly. So
You've got it, Richard?
Jay. Sorry, Jay, can you just hand the presentation back over to me, please?
Jay, if you're having a problem, I can do that quickly.
Rob, if you can just do that for me, please. Thank you.
Send it here.
Okay, there we go. Excellent. Okay, Rob, if you can just confirm that you're seeing the screen.
Yeah, screen is on.
Okay, we're all good to go. Excellent. Okay, so just quickly, so I apologize for that. We just overcame the technical difficulties there. So Zutari, we're doing work throughout Africa. I'm currently working in Nigeria on some hydroelectric works, and it's quite exciting to be involved in this time and place of energy development. There's a lot of focus on sustainability, and this particular presentation has an agenda. I want to just see a transformation in, I think it mirrors my own personal journey, you could say that. So I've been working with Eskom for many years, and then I went private for the last 10 or 15 years or so. And I've had to try and re-examine everything I know about electrical engineering and my purpose here as an engineer, and I really challenged myself in this area. And so I think part of this presentation is to extend a challenge out as well to the audience in terms of where they're going with their careers and how to make a difference to the country as a whole. So this particular presentation, I'll be covering some definitions of the green economy and the associated aspects of it. We'll be looking at something called the mineral energy complex, which tends to dominate or has historically dominated the South African energy arena. I want to just quickly give you a short overview of the Sustainable Development Goals and how they are transforming countries and cities and national agendas and continents as a whole. And then we look at some of the drivers of change, have a look at the South African policy landscape, have a look at something called the New Growth Path and the Green Accord that came out a couple of years ago, and then we'll extend it into the current electricity crisis and focus and close on becoming future ready. I am conscious that there's quite a lot of information in this presentation, so I'm going to go right into it. So I think
Richard, we can't hear you.
etc. And as part of this transition, this was often done at the expense of parity in terms of societal well-being, etc. So the lot of miners in coal mines and the smog and environmental effects of a coal-fired station have long-term impacts that were not necessarily aligned to the well-being of the population as a whole or society. So the green economy tries to look at specifically growth based on what they call the triple bottom line, which includes economic prosperity, environmental and social well-being. So I think that will probably give you a rough summary of it, but it follows what they call a low carbon growth trajectory. Basically, how can we grow the economy? We understand that the economy requires energy. Energy is often directly linked to growth as people transition from, say, lower class to middle class. Their energy consumption increases significantly. They purchase fridges, televisions, or whatever. And so there's often, with prosperity and a growing middle class, there is a growing demand for energy. But can you transition that along a low carbon growth path? So these are some of the challenges that we look at. I want to address this issue of well-being. So well-being is something that you'll see contained within the Constitution and the National Development Plan. But it basically looks at the elements that would require a minimum decent standard of living. And I think the challenge is we often look at poverty reduction, and that is the main agenda. But poverty reduction, wealth doesn't necessarily mean well-being. There are lots of people who have a lot of money and wealth, but they're not, maybe they don't feel, they lack with health issues. And so even though they have material wealth, they don't have physical health, or maybe they lack safety and security, and they feel quite vulnerable, and that doesn't equate to necessarily a holistic view of a decent standard of living. So when we talk about well-being, we're talking about what a individual or family would look for. They want to be able to feel that their children can be decently educated. They want to feel secure in the environment. They should have access to healthcare, have a reasonable chance of decent employment, and so forth, and a clean environment. So the green economy looks at the whole well-being of the contribution of whatever the projects are that are being doing, that you're considering. So it's seen holistically along this well-being lines, which is a little bit more than poverty reduction. So how do we elevate a person's lot in life to that of being a point of well-being, which is not necessarily linked to GDP. The next definition I want to just cover here is something called water, energy, food nexus. So nexus just speaks about the relationship and dependencies. And when we look at a green economy, there is a lot of relationship and dependencies. So you need water to grow food. You need energy to do the same thing. You need energy to extract drinkable water as you use water treatment plants. And then you need water to cool the power stations themselves. If you think of the current, even nuclear plants or whatever, that they use water for cooling purposes. So you find quite a lot of interdependencies between these different components, and the green economy looks at taking advantage of the relationships between these sort of relationships. So for example, in water treatment, or we could remove sludge from the water purification, put that through a biomass plant, generate energy back into it, which will then close the cycle. So these energy, water, energy, food nexus is a major aspect of the circular economy or green economy. And that is where the innovation takes place. So leftover, you're growing crops for food. You can take the leftovers, run them through a biomass plant or whatever, and generate energy from those as well. I want to just focus on something called the mineral energies complex. It has dominated South Africa's landscape, energy landscape, and also the GDP for many years. But currently, we've moved much more towards a service level economy, and its impact is a lot less from a GDP perspective, maybe 10% of the GDP, but it still provides a dominant force in policy decision making. So there is a relationship between your mines, your mining houses, and they will then produce coal. That coal is then used for producing cheap energy through Eskom and Sasol for fuels, and that likewise feeds back to the extraction process. So you have this this profit cycle that keeps the economy turning, you could call it. However, we know that it generates a significant amount of emissions, and South Africa's emission contribution is disproportionate to its inhabitants, population, and its GDP, because we really have a predominantly coal-based basis for energy generation. So this whole minerals energy complex is quite intricate, and as I mentioned, it does play a part in policy decision making. Now, I'm going to come back to this a little bit later and address it, but I just want you to understand this this relationship that exists. The Sustainable Development Goals. So a lot has been said about them. I'm sure you hear about it mentioned in the news on a regular basis. A lot of policy decision making has been done and is shifting towards aligning with these goals. I don't know how familiar the audience is with these particular goals or the history behind it, but they have become quite significant. The United Nations had a breakthrough, you could call it, in terms of these goals. And I want to just reiterate why they are so important. So Jeffrey Sachs was Kofi Annan's advisor on environmental, and he also was fundamental contributor in establishing these goals. And basically the goals, he listed 4 aspects of them, why they are so important. I think that's actually the key to it. And they have actually been quite successful. If you think of the Millennium Development Goals, no one really, as individual participants, bought into them. But we see a very different story with the SDGs. So they're critical for social mobilization and basically aligning society in a certain direction. So basically, it's something that society can get behind. It's measurable, it's tangible in a sense, and it's something that the person in the streets can actually identify with. They create quite a lot of peer pressure in terms of publicity and basic privately when you can compare different strategies. I think Trump is taking a lot of flack right now because he's basically walking away from these SDGs in certain areas, and it has resulted in a lot of pressure being placed upon that administration in terms of the stance they've taken, in terms of their lack of alignment with the SDGs. And they mobilize epistemic communities, basically centers of knowledge, of expertise. So you basically, around a particular goal, maybe goal 11, which is sustainable cities that I'm looking at, there's a whole knowledge community which has grown around addressing what makes a sustainable city, and various practices and bodies of knowledge arise through that. And they mobilize across sectoral, diverse, multi-stakeholder networks. So, I mean, part of the success of a green economy and any work in this direction is this relationship between the public-private
Richard, you muted again.
section over here. So we want to transition the economy from largely carbon dependent and some comments on transitional challenges. It's not that easy because you build up an entire society and a socio-technological configuration which is linked to the current way of doing things. So radically new technologies have a hard time to break through because of regulations, infrastructure, user practices, maintenance networks. You can read the rest for yourself. But what it's saying is that there's so much inertia behind the current way of doing things. You know, those logistical paths are already in place. The relationships are built in. People's dependencies have been built onto that. To suddenly transition could have significant consequences, and you'll meet with a lot of resistance from the current status quo, let's call it that. Well, in this case, it might be the MEC complex. The next thing about sustainability transitions are long-term, multidimensional, and fundamental transformations. So it requires a shift in also how we consume things. And I mean, just to bring it down to maybe a real level, you know, if we want to do a sustainable transition, we need to examine ourselves. Maybe driving into work by yourself in your car is not the most practical, sustainable way of consuming fuel, unless we, of course, move towards, you know, drones or electric cars or whatever the story is. So it's just talking about the fact that it also needs to be a just transition, and I'm going to speak about that, but it doesn't happen overnight. It will take a little bit of time. South Africa's NDP speaks about a just transition. And I'm going to, if you would like to ask questions, just type them in the question box, and we are going to have a little break halfway through to answer some of these questions if they arise. But when we're looking at a transition to a green economy, it needs to be just. What does that mean? It means that we can't just shut the mines down, can't just shut the Eskom power stations down, because there are 30,000 people employed in those areas, and maybe many of them might be poor and the vulnerable with a lack of education, and then they would just be left effectively to fend for themselves. And so in our current energy intensive industries and the mining sector, we would need to look carefully how we transition from this current way of doing things. It's not a simple binary switch of flicking a switch, because of this issue of the poor and the vulnerable. And you'll see that the National Planning Council has picked it up. A shift to a green economy and more sustainable practices in general should not be seen in the opposition to development, job creation, and economic growth. Nor should it be seen as a nice to have or merely an additional sector of the economy. With all the developmental challenges in South Africa, the only way to really advance environmental sustainability is to be tied to human economic development. So we need to transition, but it's got to be done in a way that the poor and the vulnerable don't suffer. And I'm going to allude to that in a couple of ways. So, and it could be a bit controversial, but for example, if we go out and replace the current way of generation with purely using renewable power, the amount of employment, permanent employment associated with a solar panel farm in the Karoo is quite limited. And so we are displacing a significant portion of population, especially if we're importing those solar panels and not necessarily setting up local manufacturing practice. And so this has to be considered holistically and in the context of a just transition. It's completely recognized that it has to happen, but it must be done in such a way that the broad sectors of society in South Africa benefit from it. Okay, so There's a topology of transition pathways. Now, this is basically looking at whether a change is taking place via external measures or internal measures, and whether you plan to change or you went there kicking and screaming. It's talking about disruption or future forecasting or strategy in essence. So to use maybe an example would be that, let's say Eskom itself is currently, or some of the municipalities, their business is being disrupted at the moment in terms of private generation, solar panels, etc. And if you cannot reorientate yourself, or you haven't planned for it, then your response is going to be uncoordinated and pretty much reactive. And so you're trying to reorientate yourself constantly to this changing environment, where if endogenous says, okay, I've done forecasting, I see that there's a shift to a low carbon environment or economic basis or green economy, and it's self-driven. The business or entity starts adapting itself to the environmental changes through a strategic proactive process. And that can either be internally or it can have external influence. So the external change is the purposive transition and emergent transformation. So just basically showing that you can either go in kicking or screaming, or you'll have change thrust upon you, but it's going to happen whether you like it or not. Or you can strategically plan for it and either use internal or external mechanisms to navigate through that transition. The NDP speaks about a virtuous cycle of change. That's the National Development Plan, Vision 2030 for South Africa. And the drivers of change are a strong leadership, an effective government, and the largest contributor here is an active citizenry. So it's people not being passive, but being active in how they're going to respond to what they see around them. And you see, these are drivers of growth. And you can see that there's a loop. As you reduce poverty, there's rising living standards, conditions improve, opportunities become available, you produce new capabilities, which then produce employment and growth. And so you end up with this cycle of development. The glue that holds this whole lot together is social cohesion. People working together to drive this machine around. So it needs to be a cohesive change. Okay, so I'm going to just pause there for a second and just maybe leave it open to some questions.
Attendees, we are open to questions. Please post your questions if you have any.
Richard, there was just a comment that some people missed some information while you were muted. I would suggest if they did miss, if they could just indicate sort of what area, and then maybe you could fill that in.
Okay. Okay. Look, I didn't really mute myself. Maybe that was when we switched over. Okay, so it was just an overview of Zutari, the company that I come.
You're muting now, Richard.
Thanks, Rob. So here I'm going to have a look at the South African policy landscape. And the question probably is South Africa doing enough? And what has transpired over the last 10 or 15 years? And just this comment from the reconstruction. This is back in 1994, the Reconstruction Development Program, which I really think is so poignant. It really encapsulates it. No political democracy can survive and flourish if the mass of our people remain in poverty, without land, without tangible prospects for a better life. Tackling poverty and deprivation must therefore be the first priority of a democratic government. And it really does encapsulate a vision for the future. This was set right back in 1994, and I don't think anything else has changed since then. But it should be something that we look at whenever we are we tackling these issues in terms of the green economy transition. So interesting, the South African Constitution enshrines well-being and sustainability. I wasn't aware of this until probably last year after doing some research into it. Section 24, in terms of our Constitution of South Africa, something we can be very proud of, by the way. I mean, here we have an example of the virtues of our Constitution. Everyone has the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being. So I talked about well-being earlier, and here it comes back into the Constitution in terms of safety, security, the ability to have access to water, etc. And well-being also includes green space, recreation and leisure is included in that issue of well-being. And then to have the environment protected for the benefit of present and future generations through reasonable legislation and other measures that prevent pollution and ecological degradation, promote conservation, and then secure ecologically sustainable development. So it's interesting that development needs to be ecologically sustainable, and you can have this pendulum swing a little bit too far, where we will stop all development because we're maybe cutting a cane field down and it's seen as destroying green nature. That's not what this is saying. It says that we need to promote a justifiable economic and social development while securing ecologically sustainable development. And so that ecologically sustainable development is the focus area, but it has to be in balance. You can't sacrifice the one without the other. And finding that tension is often a bit of a stickler. Anyway, the policy landscape, this just shows you a quick little timeline from South Africa's first democratic elections. The Constitution was promulgated in 1996. There was a World Summit on Sustainable Development that was hosted in Johannesburg, which was very significant. A national framework for sustainable development was issued in South Africa in 2008. A National Planning Commission was established in 2010. The New Growth Path emerged at 2011, and with that came the first policy decisions around the green economy. COP17 was hosted in Durban at the same time, which is quite significant. I mean, South Africa's had two major interventions here, the World Summit and COP17, and then we had the NDP was produced, which is quite a significant document. I would encourage you to read it. Agenda 2063, which is the African agenda for African unity, was developed as well, and the South African implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Okay, so and then we hit COVID. So there's been what this aims to show is that South Africa hasn't been sleeping from a sustainable perspective in terms of promulgating legislation, and I'll show you some of that. So there is a mass of positive move in the correct decision in terms of government's agenda. So we have the sustainable and well-being aspect built into the constitution, and it's not if the government has been sleeping on it. So this is definitely, I was very encouraged to see how much of this has been moving forward. And just a quick look at the whole issues of government. I'm not going to focus on this too much, but it's just helpful to understand that responsibility for transition sits with national government, provincial government, and local government. And they have different spheres of influence, and they're actually enshrined in the constitution as well. And so you're dealing with this green economy needs to enact itself through all these different spheres of government. And that can also be quite challenging if local government is not necessarily aligned with provincial or national government, vice versa. So there are linkages there as well. This is just a quick overview of the planning process, of how national plans transcend through the provincial level. There's the NDP, which I talked about, and then that moves through to provincial growth and development strategies and plans, and then they move down to a local development plan. And the South African Constitution is very particular that local planning councils have got a lot of independence when it comes to this. So your city municipal development strategies, etc. This has been challenged in court before, and the Constitution ruled in favor of the local municipalities for their decisions in terms of their growth path and strategies, how they're going to do things, which has bearing when it comes to this issue of the green agenda. So I just want to have a quick look at this new growth path and green accord. So in 2011, a green economy accord was signed under the new growth path by the Zuma administration, but it was really probably the first step towards this transition. And it was the outcome of the social dialogue. I talked about these different sectors getting together and thrashing out how they see a transition. So this was the first time that enabling policy was put in place. There were whole different arms, aspects of it. I think, let me give you an overview of what that sat inside that accord. But the aspiration was significant. It looked at the whole issue of being innovative, practical, implementable, etc. And it was primarily looking at water and energy sectors. So some of the commitments of the accord were to do with rollout of solar water heaters. I know that Eskom was heavily involved in that. Investment in the green economy, which is a little bit nebulous. Rollout of renewable energy, which we actually saw massive progress made in that area. The whole move of energy efficiency, which we also saw significant demand side management programs taking place, waste recycling, biofuels, etc., retrofitting, clean coal initiatives, and so forth. The whole aspect of carbon emission reduction on roads, which actually contributed to the decision to go to bus rapid transport, and the whole moving of electrification, which would then remove this whole burning of fossil fuel for cooking, etc. And there are a couple of other grey aspects of it that I'm not going to go into. So this was generally the New Growth Path Accord 4, and it was implemented. The success of implementation is another story. So what happened is the M&E, which is monitoring and evaluation portion of this, wasn't well done. And so it's difficult to judge how successful the program.
You're breaking up again, Richard.
The renewables programs that have been running. So that was measured. Okay, we talked about this NDP vision of a low carbon transition. So within the NDP, it actually talks about this reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So South Africa's plan is to transition. The issue is around the short-term plans and how to do that. And it's recognized that long-term plans hinge on global partnerships, and we need to do it without harming jobs and being competitive. So that is a little bit of a repeat. So just quickly, what does the NDP say? We need this whole transition. It's got to be sustainable. And the NDP recognizes certain things. We are well endowed with mineral deposits. So I think the aim is not to stop mining, but the aim is to look at how we can mine without consuming significant amounts of carbon-based energy. So a transition of the mine energy consumption to renewables through different innovative mechanisms. And then this aspect of resilience. So resilience, for example, is something that is built in. A classic example would be the droughts that hit Cape Town over the last couple of years, sort of exposed the city's resilience to that particular aspect of its resilience, put it that way, in terms of water sustainability. And it often impacts on the poorer communities. So the affluent communities have the means to go and purchase water from the shops or make a plan. Not so the poorer communities, they often get hit the hardest. And then just investment in a recognition that skills and technology and the whole capacitating the population should be part of it. And so if you're going to do the transition, with the transition comes a real focus on capacitating the population and the whole aspect of innovation, and an alignment with our education systems. And then the whole issue of pricing. You know, do we have a pricing mechanism that is mitigating it? I know there is complaints about Eskom's pricing at the moment, but it does have a push and a pull effect. So as Eskom increases its tariff, it's more and more big businesses, etc., look at their competitiveness, and it then pushes them to start making strategic energy efficiency decisions that affect the effectiveness of that operation. And so an escalation in energy costs actually has a knock-on effect in terms of transitioning to a green economy. That's part of the kicking and screaming transition that we were talking about, where this particular effect creates a knock-on effect, and for businesses to remain in practice and to be competitive, they're going to have to do something. And it's actually forcing a move to become a lot more efficient and a lot more conscious of these aspects of it. And then consumer awareness. I was in Europe about 20 years ago, and they already had the whole recyclable waste disposal system with your 3 bins, etc. That was 20 years ago. And it was already ingrained into the culture of the country that I was visiting. In South Africa, we have had a little bit of a waste culture. Electricity was cheap, and we could waste it effectively. I mean, I've worked in factories where there were no off switches for lights. You walk into the factory and the lights burn 24/7 because at whatever it was, 3 cents a kilowatt hour, no point in switching them off. Those days are gone. But there was a culture that grew up around that, and consumer awareness and initiative wasn't really part of it. And then this whole development and having a focused development on competitive green products and services, and starting to create markets that South Africa can sell to the rest of the world at a competitive advantage. So we really need to become not just markets. We need to be exporting these services and products into the rest of Africa or into the rest of the world. We have a competitive cost advantage here in South Africa, and it's questionable as to whether we're leveraging it effectively at this stage. Just a quick look at some of the legislation that has gone on. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but you'll see that a lot of it is relatively in recent times as well. So this is all legislation that is advancing the transition to the green economy. We see the Green Economy Accord, Industrial Policy Action Plan, and all of them encapsulate a green economy drive or agenda. The Sustainable Development Action Plan, National Climate Change, anyway, Integrated Resources Plan from the Department of Energy, etc., etc., etc. The White Paper on Science, Technology and Innovation, which means that we need to, if we're going to spend money on innovation, etc., it should be around developing this aspects that will assist in terms of this low carbon transition. Just a quick look at, I didn't put a reference in here, but this I think came out of one of the studies conducted recently, is that this shows the blue line or purple line shows a business as usual in terms of energy production and energy demand over the next 50 years or so. And what you see is the SAIEE one, the red one, is if we pursue a green economy goal and drive it hard. So the green economy agenda was pushed, and we start transitioning to the low carbon economy. In the 2020, we actually almost are following this path to a certain extent. What is interesting to note is that whether we like it or not, come in 2030, 2035, we are going to have the issue taken out of our hands anyway. So we're going to be forced by both just the massive increase in extracting coal and generation, also the age of old plant and various other factors to do the transitioning anyway. So it's coming, it's just a matter of time as to how quickly we start focusing on doing the transition and the casualties along the way. So this basically illustrates the fact that that a transition is, coal is a finite resource. So we don't have an infinite supply of it. And just the social impact. So this was just looking at, very difficult to read too much into these studies, but basically the perception is that if we do a green economy transformation and promote it, we'll have a much faster reduction in inequality and a much better income parity, and also a faster transition or reduction in the human poverty index. So this particular report is advocating that a low carbon economy transition will have long-term benefits and even short-term benefits. You can see the short-term. So just a quick aspect of employment implications for the South African power sector transition. So an audit was conducted in 2018. So we'd been rolling out significant REI PPPs, round 1 to 4, the power producers procurement program. And what happened? So this was an attempt to do an assessment on the impact of that. So just, I think the opening statement is pretty interesting. The employment implications .
We obviously have a lot of mountain bikers, a lot of mountain bike fans watch the Tour de France as well, and they'll all ask you about Rocco. Here's some stats on Julian Alaphilippe so far. His top speed on the descent,
the claim is that 32,000 direct full-time equivalent jobs were created, and that a further 100,000 can emerge. And there is a context here. The loss of up to 35,000 coal mining employees in the Central Basin appears likely due to the planned decommissioning of Eskom's older coal over the next couple of years, however fast it happens. So the problem is that depending on how the power mix happens, so whether you go for certain, let's call it low mixes that don't require significant maintenance teams or whatever, that will definitely impact on how this transition takes place. So if we were using biomass, which is quite resource intensive, human resource intensive, it's going to be quite significantly different to rolling out significant solar farms across the country. So that will definitely impact on these aspects of it. So in summary, they're saying it's difficult to predict. And the employment contribution gap, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but where there's a lack of standardization and the complexity is significant because there's significant value chains behind this. Bit of a cop-out, but that's where it stands at the moment. So there was a green economy inventory conducted recently, March 2015, which is significant. It looked at the transition over the last 5 to 10 years and tried to make sense of what's been happening in terms of, where have we transitioned? This is so green economy has different legs, or it's a sectoral view, and you can see that by far most of the initiatives are taking place in the energy sector, and there are different types of project descriptions taking place there. Secondly, around transportation in terms of energy savings there, or a low economy transition there, and it can take place in many forms. The whole aspect of a green economy around agricultural use has been significant. This is about resource and conservation. So part of that would be wildlife management and the South African game parks, which is a resource and has an economy built around it. And likewise, the built environment, your green buildings, green precincts, etc., etc. Then we have sustainable consumption and production, which is surprisingly small. This is a sort of circular economy type of arrangement, and basically there's a concern. Well, this was done in 2015, but it sort of indicates that not a lot has taken place within the manufacturing sector to look at how they're closing this green economy gap. Then the aspect of waste. I have a friend of mine who says, how can we use your waste? Waste is a resource, but in terms of how people understand it, it's that aspect of using waste as a resource, closing the loop. And then water, which is also surprisingly small. I would have anticipated that to be a little bit more significant. Of the projects taking place, a fair whack of them, a significant chunk of those are taking place within KwaZulu Natal, which makes me quite encouraged because that's where I'm coming from, followed by the Western Cape and Gauteng. And a lot of the KwaZulu Natal ones are in the agricultural sector. And then where's the funding coming from? Most of it is local, with 30% foreign capital, and a lot of it's through partnerships. So just in terms of the summary of the green economy audit that was taking place, there are a whole lot of policies, and I mentioned a couple of them. And the problem is that some of them that definitely don't necessarily overlap each other well, and you can have that needs to be aligned. And all provinces and sectors have got a role to play. So we do see jobs as one of the key aspects. I mean, that's what we have to address in South Africa. It is a fundamental part of it. We see, as we would have expected, a reduction in GHG emissions. This issue of innovation requires a lot more investment. And this aspect of creating shared value is fundamentally a part of it. So I'm actually probably going to end off here. Strategic areas of intervention. So I've got Cyril there. And what I want to say around this particular slide is that it doesn't sit with government. It's a partnership between all of us picking up particular roles and playing a part. And so it shouldn't be that we just sit and say someone else is going to tackle this problem, or someone else must initiate. So the challenges, these are the strategic areas of intervention that we identified. Basically, the whole issue of promoting knowledge management and sharing. Whereas, if we are going to emerge in South Africa as a strong sector in the green economy, we need to start synergizing with each other, creating knowledge centers, which then can be used to build economies around. And the whole aspect of research needs significant investment. And a lot of that, as engineers, we can contribute significantly to these aspects of it. The whole issue of social dialogue and multi-stakeholder collaboration. I think often we try and shy away from this, but it's through dialogue that opportunities will emerge. And the fact that we don't have to do it alone, and that if we find a network, start building up networks of collaboration, the opportunities will emerge a lot faster. And they could be local or continental, even national collaboration, where we can come up with these solutions. And then the whole issue of looking at the whole cross-sectoral nexuses, where our economy tends to be quite sectoral. So the energy team will work in isolation from the water team. But if the opportunities exist in the nexus or in the linkages between these different sections, is where we will find innovation and a lot of opportunity to transition. And I'm not going to focus on aspects of finance. We've spoken enough about the just transition, and then the whole aspect of building skills and capacity. We as engineers have an incredible opportunity to do this. And then an outcome of this will be the whole aspect of job creation and a potentially and possibly very prosperous South Africa. I mean, China has done this before. They have had significant growth in terms of the middle class and the economic drivers. And we have the opportunity in this country to follow suit and to be leaders. So I'm going to stop there and rather just leave it open for questions now. But I think the challenge for me is that I would like to encourage the audience to become players in this game through either expanding their own knowledge base, building up linkages in terms of networks, engaging with stakeholders, doing research on the internet, looking at opportunities to become involved from an innovation perspective, maybe contacting academia, building up relationships with university masters and doctoral programs, whatever it takes. Just don't leave it as a status quo. And just bear in mind that it's about a just transition, that whatever you do will have a consequence on possibly a consequence on the poor in South Africa, and that must be considered and addressed. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to stop. I think
Thanks, Richard. That was a great presentation. We've had a few questions, and let me pose some of them to you. Some of them are comments. There are some good there are some countries that are good examples that have got the balance correct in terms of social needs and green economy. Do you perhaps want to comment on that?
Look, it really is a difficult question to answer because everyone is coming off a different starting point and they have different resources available to them. And they have different challenges. So European countries have got low urbanization. We have gotten a mass urbanization, large informal sector here that contributes to some of the challenges. We have not adequately maybe invested in education for various reasons historically, and that has had consequences as well. We've also had this over-reliance on this MEC, the mineral energy complex, which has dominated the landscape for many years and which we became very secure in with cheap electricity, etc., etc. But it wasn't for everyone, and only certain parts of the population benefited from that. So, you know, we can look at first world countries, and it's difficult to do a comparative analysis. We can look at the path of other countries like China or India, and you know, it's all not completely rosy there, but they have been following specific paths. So even in China, you know, they went on this massive growth sprawl, but like a city like Beijing shut down for 2 weeks in 2013 because the smog was so bad. They then went and built 2 additional cities, moved several million people out of Beijing and created infrastructure, and had to catch a wake up because they realized that their growth path was not sustainable. I was doing some research on China last night, and they've got something like 200 green city initiatives. And the latest cities that they're building at the moment, they've got 10 targeted cities under construction, all with a net zero carbon footprint, the entire city. So when China does it big and it does it hard, you know, but they realized that they were on a path that was not sustainable. So they had invested a lot in industry, but that was not a green growth initiative path. And they've had to now transition away from it significantly.
Okay, thanks, Richard. The next one is there's a technical challenge in transmission, but I hope the presentation will be shared. Richard, I think you will be sharing the presentation.
Yes, I'm happy to share the presentation.
We'll put it on
I've got quite a couple of other. Look, if we're going to finish with the questions now, I've got a whole lot of slides addressing the current energy crisis in South Africa. So looking at the current rolling blackouts that we've got and some other things that I'm happy to continue with if some of the audience want to stay on. But let's finish the formal session, and then I might, if you want to, Mr. Chair, I can proceed with those slides. But they do tackle the current energy crisis in South Africa and the implications that we have with the rolling blackouts, etc. But if attendees want to hang in and there is time, I will take us through those.
Okay.
What is the question on transmission?
Okay, transmission. There's technical challenges in transmission, but we'll pick that up later.
Challenges.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Richard, that referred to your breaking up from the audio, the transmission of audio, not transmission group.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for that, Rob. Yeah, Richard, all very well, but unless there's political will, strong leadership evident and meaningful support from government, the whole concept becomes a bit of a lame duck. What is your comments?
Well, we definitely have seen movement. So I think, ironically, there is a lot of policy which I've shared that is supporting this, which is very encouraging. I mean, the policy, if you go and unpack most of the policy, it really is aligned to the SDGs. There's definitely a will, but we have had a bit of a challenging period in our history that derailed a lot of some of the momentum that was taking place. I don't really want to go into that right now. I think we're sitting at a new, let's call it dispensation, where there definitely is an alignment in terms of trying to see these things unpack. There is obviously concern, you can't just open up the economy and flood the market with renewables without ensuring that this just transition takes place. And there is definitely a gap between policy and implementation of that policy, closing that loop. And that has been identified as one of the obstacles at the moment, is that we actually do have positive policies. We do have some legislation which definitely encourages this, but we haven't enabled, the enablers behind that are missing. So I think the will is there, the intent is there. I think sometimes the capacity is lacking, and the ability to bring it down to a local level, to get a transition through the 3 spheres of government.
Okay. Next one, there's a few questions.
So just to say there that we have individual responsibilities. As I said, this locus of change means that if government doesn't change and Eskom doesn't adapt, it will be forced to adapt by external environmental changes. So what will happen is those that can afford and big industry will move and transition themselves, and it depends who's leading and who's following. So you can be pulled kicking and screaming along a transition path, and that's unfortunately how we find ourselves right now. I mean, South Africa is transitioning, but it's transitioning along the kicking and screaming path, and as opposed to the strategic, let's call it maybe an Australian transition path or New Zealand transition path, where they've planned this thing and they've made a plan and they're following that. But as I said, it's, the contexts are different. You've got to be very careful to compare ourselves in that light fully.
Okay. The next question, it's a set of questions. How are we doing as a country regarding the Sustainable Development Goals? The energy goals, to be precise on that. Then the convergence of a global carbon pricing mechanism and our local carbon tax developments. How are we doing as a country regarding the Sustainable Development Goals? Okay. Convergence. Okay, no, it's the same one, yeah. Okay, how are we doing as a country regarding the SDG?
Okay, so look, I cannot answer that question, but I know where the information is sitting. So the accuracy of the information is questionable as well. So I know the African Union keep a record of that particular information. If you go to the African Union website, you'll find different countries and their alignment with the SDGs, and they've got the different measures, but you don't know what is sitting behind that data. And so in honesty, it's questionable in terms of value. The South Africa has in recent times created a department of performance and assessment. I've gotten blank as to its proper name. I've got it on my computer, but that particular department is monitoring the implementation of the NDP and all these different plans, and it's a well-structured unit that does very transparent reporting. You will find most of the information there. Then there's also
Richard, we lost you.
probably not really aligned to what I'm trying to do. but I believe the information is available through these different mechanisms.
Okay, Richard, we lost you there for a while.
Oh, did I drop off?
Yeah, well,
Okay, sorry. So my apologies for that. The information is available. I haven't particularly sorted out that information in terms of how we align with the SDGs as a nation. You'll find some of it on the African Union website. I did see it there. But I question the accuracy of that information and how often it's updated. And then secondly, the government has got a performance and monitoring, or M&E, team that monitors the implementation of the programs. It's the program planning department of national government. They seem to be pretty organized, and there are a lot of reports that are available that will give you all the KPIs and how the different departments and different sectors are performing according to the different plans that are in place. And there are a lot of these things, but there's a specific department where this information is sitting.
okay. Can the prosumer or energy entrepreneur assist in driving this just energy transition?
I think that they are. I think they're an incredibly important part of the puzzle. You know, markets are often driven. You know, you have pull and pull forces. Now, if consumers shy away from particular products that are deemed to be eco-friendly, it definitely shifts market sentiment. I mean, I just opened the fridge the other day to see my wife had purchased milk in renewable cartons, and I was really encouraged to see that there had been this transition in that. So suddenly there's a move towards getting away from plastics. And now if everyone goes out and buys that, even if it costs a little bit more, it'll force other manufacturers to follow suit. So there's definitely a drive from a consumer's perspective, awareness, that can force a transition. And then now the issue of lobbying, and but from an innovation perspective, you know, that's really where South Africa has to be. I mean, we need to really be investing in an innovation mindset. I mean, the next couple of slides that I'm not showing here, because I just had too many slides, had to deal with the current culture and how to transition our culture to be a lot more entrepreneurial and innovative in response to what's happening around us. But we need to change the business as usual, and that requires entrepreneurs and innovative thinking. And my challenge to the audience is, don't settle for your current status quo.
Okay, a follow-up on that. Do you have any good examples of just energy transition options?
Examples?
Mm-hmm.
Well, whether they're successful or not, I think there was that Modderfontein biomass project where they took the whole herds of cows, they collected the waste from it, and they used methane gas extraction to power. I think BMW is purchasing that power at the moment. That is an example. There are several examples cited. A lot of it is maybe the whole renewables program that ran out for the last couple of years before it ground to a halt. But that particular program did contribute and was measured as a move towards a green energy transition. What we really need to see is more of an uptake on the manufacturing side, because every job in manufacturing has a knock-on effect, and it's quite well documented that the manufacturing contribution to welfare is significant, because often the products can be exported, you generate foreign revenue, and all sorts of things like that. So in that particular area, I haven't seen a large uptake yet, and I was quite surprised by what I've seen so far. But I think in the last couple of years, that haven't been reported on, there has been more of a move towards that. I think factory managers are becoming aware. A whole lot of clients that I'm dealing with now, I'm actually involved in a whole lot of projects with a major industrial customer that's looking at exporting power to the grid using renewable means, through cogeneration or whatever. So there are opportunities.
Okay, following on from there, where countries have been very successful in this green economy, what have you noted as key success factors that we can adopt and adapt to our conditions?
Okay, I think from what I've seen is the synergy between industry, academia, and public service, government as well. So they're prepared to work together to address a lot of these issues. So there are think tanks that are put together, and there's a lot of synergy between and linkages between these two. So you'll see a lot more partnerships, and that has been lacking in the South African context. There's often been a us and them, and a lot of distrust between business and government at times. The whole issue of labor unions and their concern that the transition won't be just. What is the impact on jobs, etc. And that hasn't really fostered a climate of engagement between the partners. And so we're going to have to get together around a table, labor, industry, government, to really work these things out. That is one of the things that is clearly missing from what I can see where the successes are in Europe, for example. But once again, their challenges are different. They have a lot more per unit wealth or per capita wealth, and there's not so much disparity. But that partnership aspect is key to doing the transition. A compact, a social compact. We need a compact between industry, civil society, and government. And that can be at local level, provincial level, national level.
Okay, the next one is a water issue. I'm not sure, but let's see how it goes. What's on the pipeline with regard to resolving long outstanding polluted potable water in different areas in South Africa, such as Witbank? It has been suffering from dirty water, which is not drinkable, and affecting the well-being of the community, especially for the poor who can't afford to purchase bottled water. And that's been going on for over a decade, while Cape Town water crisis was responded to as a matter of urgency.
A good question. So, okay, I'm going to throw this back, and my response might be a little bit harsh, but I want to challenge the audience in this regard. You can wait for someone to react, or you can be innovative, come up with a solution, take it to your local government or the stakeholders and bring it to the table. And maybe that innovative solution can be turned into something that can be exported throughout the rest of Africa and transform South Africa, and we can establish a factory and so forth. That is the sort of transition and the responses that we're looking for. We're not necessarily looking for, I've got a problem, government must fix this problem. I think the government, I cannot speak on behalf of local governments and their effectiveness. They have got a particular mandate, they're supposed to do it. I'm not in a position to comment on that, but I can comment on how we should be responding.
Richard, we seem to have lost you.
I think Cyril's inviting us to be part of that solution.
Okay, let's move on from there. How will we move? How will the move from coal to renewables lead to a faster reduction in income inequality or bridging the gap between the poor and the rich? Noting that currently the price of electricity per kilowatt from coal is extremely cheaper than that charged by IPPs from their green implementations. This means that the cost of electricity is most likely going to shoot up faster than it is now as we move aggressively towards green energy, thus becoming difficult for the poor to have access to electricity.
Okay, look, that one's relatively easy to answer. First of all, I think the cost of coal is not cheaper. The cost of that we're currently paying for electricity at the moment is cheaper, but we have not factored in the 70 or 80 billion rand overruns on Medupi and Kusile that Eskom have been desperately trying to get from NERSA. Now, if you put that capital, likewise, we have not done the 70 or 80 billion or 150 billion required to recapitalize the energy market in South Africa. So the cost that we see for electricity at the moment is no reflection of what the true cost of that energy is. We've completely underinvested, as we can see the consequences of in our infrastructure, and part of that is by keeping the price artificially low. It has a massive knock. We've just delayed an impact which is now caught up with us. So if we bring in the true cost of energy to both recapitalize and to pay off the likes of the Kusiles and Medupis, you'll probably find that the cost of a renewable solution with a battery bank is significantly cheaper. So I think we just need to be careful with what we see in terms of a tariff at the moment and what that means in terms of the real price of the asset and the extraction of the asset, or I won't say asset, or the resources behind that. That, you know, we're not 100% accurate in terms of what we're seeing in that area. So I did an assessment, for example, of off-grid electrification about 5 or 6 years ago. It had already become significantly cheaper to go off-grid at that time. We just don't seem to have the ability to, you know, the capital cost involved in extending transmission lines out into deep rural areas has become quite exorbitant. At a cost per kilometer, you know, you're looking at 2-3 million rand a kilometer of transmission line before you even put your electrification connections down. And so, but we're still doing it. Yet a renewable solution would probably be faster, more effective, and significantly faster. I mean, some of these transitions, it takes us 3 years to get through the environmental impact assessment stage. Yet, you know, if we're rolling out solar home solutions, you can do that in 6 months. So there are various factors to consider here. It's not a simple and easy, you know, grid power is cheaper. It's not necessarily cheaper. Not if you're in deep rural areas, and not even now. You know, it's still artificially kept a little bit lower than what it should be. I'm not an expert on the subject, so that's why I put the disclaimer in the beginning of the presentation. But I honestly think that we're in a position now where, you know, your paybacks are 2 or 3 years for solar solutions. If you can afford to do it, I will do it. Electricity prices are only going to go up.
Okay. The next one, given the move towards green energy, is there an alignment between the corresponding technological advancements and the educational curriculum to help prepare the coming generations, especially those from colleges and universities?
So look, a fantastic question. My first answer would, look, I haven't been back to school for a while. The education I got did not prepare me for any of this. I look at what my children are doing, and they seem to be slightly better equipped, and they just seem to be a little bit more knowledgeable because they're connected to the web, and they're really picking up these social issues. Maybe they're more socially queued up than I am, but from an actual the alignment between industry and government and academia, I think, is not where it should be. For example, even us as an institute, we've embarked on a program to start making contact with local academia to see how we can close that linkage between academia and what's happening in industry or in the public sector. So personally, I've seen some studies, and I don't know if we've fully aligned and transitioned our education system to align with what's needed at this stage. I think a lot more can be done. I know that the South African government is aware of this issue and has been investing money in that particular area, but I haven't quantified that or ascertained how effective that is. I haven't gone back to. I will be doing it, getting a hold of some of the professors at universities and just having to see what the curriculum is at the moment and how well that aligns with where we are going as a country. But for me, an example for me is that it should be mandatory that every South African gets taught about innovation and entrepreneurial capabilities, and also about the sustainability of the country and the planet. Those should be like mandatory. I don't know if they are, but I definitely lived in a significant amount of ignorance for many, many years, and I've forced myself on a particular journey to address that aspect of it.
Okay, the next question. Do you agree that most startups must start in the international markets and then come back to South Africa when it's favorable due to clarity in policy and funding? And then a follow-up on that is, if government would have a call to action in this space, does South Africa has the right skill set to make the lead to take the lead in Africa and possibly world due to favorable weather conditions?
Look, we have it all here. I mean, I honestly think this is the promised land. It's a very interesting question. You know, what we've seen in some of the other African countries, I work in Nigeria, Kenya, many of the folk off, get a degree in Europe, and then they come back and they make a difference. In South Africa, I don't know how many come back. But I do think some of our institutions here are pretty world class in terms of our education here in certain places, and honestly, you can get online schooling done pretty easily. I mean, I've just finished a couple of courses from Harvard online from the comfort of my house. So you have access to this. The aspect of policy and legislation is a different one. I don't know how to really respond to that. Every country has its challenges, and the grass is not necessarily greener on the other side. I've worked with a lot of European firms recently. They also have their challenges in terms of tax laws and the cost of living, the ability for their youth to even own houses which are out of reach of the general public. So it's not as cut and dry as I'm going to go overseas, get equipped, bring everything back to South Africa. I think it sounds nice on paper. Look, there are lots of different ways. I'm not going to give a clear answer on that.
Okay, Richard, that brings us to the end of the questions. Is there anything that you wanted to pick up on? I think that it is getting to 4:30. Richard, are you there?
what is the impact? Do we have another session later on that we're stepping on?
I think we've booked for an hour and a half, so we might actually run out of time.
Let's just have a look. Okay. So let me just I'll just do one or two slides here quickly. So we had a look at this aspect of the current electricity crisis. The whole aspect of load shedding, the cost of load shedding estimated between 60 to 120 billion rand to the economy, which is massive. And 2019 has been our worst year so far, 1,352 gigawatt hours shed compared to 2015. So it is a complete, energy is a direct contribution to growth. It definitely has a part to play. This is just a picture of the load shedding regimes that we've seen. You can see in 2019, 2020, it started up already again. And this is the reason. This is the availability of factor of the Eskom fleet and the other fleets. It's dropped in the year 2000 from 95%, one of the highest in the world, down to about 67%. Now, if we could invest significantly, we can maybe try and push it up to 75%, but a worst case scenario, it'll probably drop further to 65% availability factor. So that means that of all the units installed in South Africa, only sort of 65% of them are available at any one time. And how does that tabulate against a demand forecast? Well, if you can reduce demand, whether we reduce demand or not, there is still going to be growth in demand because we are a growing economy. And so we can't get away from growth in energy demand. So we have a problem. We've got a reduction in forecasted availability, and we've got whether we like, even under worst case conditions, unexpected growth in energy demand. So that leaves us with something called a shortfall and a supply gap. That supply gap, you can see the different stages of load shedding. Jay, just interrupt me if you want to knock off. So this is the latest CSR report updated, showing you the best and worst case scenarios. From the integrated resource plan, you can see that we've got a whole lot of years of load shedding ahead of us unless we can do something to bridge the gap. And bridging the gap, I'm actually going to just finish off with the slide, looks at two options. You've got supply side options and demand side options. So as more businesses become more efficient, you can even, for example, put in mass energy storage, whatever the story is, you affect the reduced demand in terms of peak demand through various options. And then supply side is we can build more plants. And the RRP looks at where this is going to come from. Wind, solar, coal, we're still building coal, etc. So, and then gas, you can see the contribution of the 3 gigs of gas. So this is prescribed, and then how we can also just cut back. So by reducing demand and by rolling out mass storage, see there's a significant benefit from storage, and storage will be a game changer. Because we've got base load, but our demand cycle is not necessarily completely aligned with that. And if you can bring storage down to local level, it does change things. And then load shedding affects demand. So the responses are twofold. Either affect the demand or we increase the supply. And this just shows you how we've just gone out. And I think another round went out yesterday or a couple of days ago this is the 2 gigawatt emergency power demand request that came out. And I think there's another one that's shortly to follow. So green energy but energy has to be base load in this case. You know, we can't, it needs to come with renewables and energy storage, and that does tend to affect its cost comparison. But we really do need an addition to base load, and solar and wind don't give us that. You know, they are green per se, but the storage aspect of it is significant. And you can see it plays a big part in the CSIR response there. Okay, anyway, I'm going to close there. We're quite well over now. But this does represent opportunity. Okay, Mr. Chair, Jay.
Thank you, our presenter. And that will bring us to the end of another interesting presentation. Before I round up our guests, we encourage you to join up with the SAIEE. You can see the website for details. And in closing, let me thank Richard for giving us an insight into the green economies. It's really opened a lot of answers, and there's a lot more work to be done, and there's lots of opportunities. Our thanks to the SAIEE for providing the medium for professionals to share their expertise, and our appreciation to all attendees for spending their time with us. Please visit the SAIEE website for upcoming events. Take care and be safe. Goodbye.